Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Outgrow's Marketer of the Month. I'm your host, Dr. Saksham Sharda. I'm the creative director at outgrow.co. And for this month, we're going to interview Scott Brinker, who is the VP of Platform Ecosystems at HubSpot. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, Scott, we're going to start with a rapid fire round just to break the ice. You get 3 passes. In case you don't want to answer the question, you can just say pass. But try to keep your answers to one word or one sentence only, okay?
All right, fire away.
All right, so the first one, at what age do you want to retire?
80.
How long does it take you to get ready in the mornings?
2 hours with exercise.
Most embarrassing moment of your life?
Big presentation, huge audience, entire slide deck goes blank.
Favorite color?
Blue.
What time of day are you most inspired?
Morning.
Fill in the blank. An upcoming marketing trend is blank.
Data integration.
How many hours of sleep do you need?
8.
The city in which the best kiss of your life happened.
New York.
Pick one, Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey.
Jack Dorsey.
How do you relax?
Gardening.
How many cups of coffee do you drink per day?
1.
A habit of yours that you hate.
Too many cheeseburgers.
The most valuable skill you've learned in life.
Appreciating the incredible diversity of different people's thinking.
The one movie that comes to your mind when I say the word ambition.
Contact.
And the last one is your favorite Netflix show.
Stranger Things.
All right, that was actually amazing. You answered all the questions, so you get a 10 on 10 and you win a car. Just kidding. You don't win anything. All right, so the long form questions, and you can take as much time as you like to answer these ones. The first one is, so you've talked about the great app explosion and predicted that the demand for innovative marketing, sales, and customer experience apps will continue to attract entrepreneurs. So, what trends are you seeing capital providers gravitating toward the most?
It's an interesting time right now in the capital market because you've got this combination of both concern about the current macroeconomic situation, but at the same time, this recognition that just digital business in general is still very early in its transformation. And you've got a lot of capital that's looking to go somewhere to put itself, productively to use. I would say the most interesting sources in the Martech world we see right now where people are directing capital is I think the broader integration across the business. Like for this past decade or so, marketing had kind of built its own castle, with the Martech stack, frankly, because the rest of the business really wasn't ready to do what marketing was looking to do from a digital engagement perspective. I think that's changed. I think the pandemic dramatically accelerated that change. And so now you see a lot of really interesting technologies about like, how do we think about it, not just marketing in its own bubble, but marketing as an integrated capability across the entire business.
And so, what exactly was marketing looking to do, and what is it looking to do now, according to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, like we could start even just looking at the data layer. Like marketing had sort of had its own little isolated space of data, which is fine, but now what we're seeing is bidirectionally marketing being able to feed that data into more corporate wide systems and environments. This whole explosion of like the data ops world and everything around like, the common, cloud data warehouse, lake house, pick your term. You know, but marketing has all this incredible insight, you know, of audiences and people at different stages, particularly earlier before they become a customer, and feeding that into systems that then make it accessible to, you know, whether it's you know, from executive leadership or people you know, in products who are trying to understand like their markets better, and then vice versa, you know, by getting all these other departments who are connecting their data, you know, into that common environment, you know, data of what's happening in sales, what's happening in customer support and success, what's happening in product usage, right? Whole product led growth, you know, ultimately this is about all this data of different kinds of interactions we're having with customers coming into a common layer where now marketers have access to like all sorts of incredible insights into, you know, these cohorts and segments, you know, the actual behaviors of people, not just in marketing touch points, but touch points across the business. So I think, I mean, even we could spend a whole session just talking about what's happening in that domain. I think it's an incredible renaissance.
And are there any examples of companies who you can give us that are handling this renaissance well enough already?
Wow, I mean, pretty much any like digital native business at this point in time, right? You know, you talk about everything from, you know, the D2Cs to like any company that you're going to hold up as like a great example of product led growth. You know, companies that are leveraging tools like Pendo and Amplitude and Apps Flyer, you know, not purely from a product development perspective or a product insights perspective, but actually is integrating that into like, oh, how does actually marketing think about its mission and sort of what tools does it have available to it?
So speaking of those tools, then marketers now have access to more technology and tools than ever before because there are simply so many options for each category of marketing technology. But it can be challenging to identify the technologies that your business actually needs. So, how, in your opinion, might this issue be resolved?
Yeah, I do feel it's a very Dickens like story here of the best of times, the worst of times. You know, so I always find like 90% of the focus needs to be on the capabilities you're looking to create for how you need to grow your business, how you need to implement your strategy. And when I say capabilities, I see the technology piece of that being frankly the smallest piece of it. You know, a lot of this comes down to like, okay, if we had certain technology to do X, Y, and Z, do we have the talent for it? Are the sort of processes the way we run things? Does it actually allow us to take advantage of this? Do we have the right sort of organizational alignment? You know, because very few things that happen in Martech happen, you know, in isolation. They're usually a step somewhere along a journey. And you need to make sure that the things that are happening earlier in that journey and the things that happen later in that journey, like all align. And so just getting really good clarity about as a business, what are the capabilities you're looking to have to engage your customers in your industry, and then sort of step back from there and like, okay, do we have the necessary technologies to be able to implement those capabilities? And then you're able to, you know, if you don't, you know, look at a set of options with a really clear set of use cases in mind, which changes the game, right? If you just like sort of let, you know, look at things, oh, well, just tell me what you have today. You know, of course, you know, all these wonderful, innovative, you know, Martech vendors can, you know, dazzle you with amazing demos. But if you're able to drive those conversations of like, okay, these are the use cases we're trying to achieve, you know, show me how that works with your product. It just sort of helps keep your focus. Now, I said that was 90% of it. I will say, because the just technology, not just for marketers, but like consumer technology and consumer behaviors are just going through a period of such rapid evolution. I do think it's worth taking a little bit of time, a little sliver where you're like, let me just sort of see what's out there. Not even with a specific capability in mind, but I'm just trying to, you know, keep a certain level of awareness, you know, to what's even possible out there, because that might feed into how I think about, oh, what are the capabilities and strategies we could implement?
So when do you think this rapid period of transformation will slow down, possibly? Or do you think it's just going to get exponentially more and more, or this is going to be the thing going forward?
Yeah, they say, predictions are hard, especially about the future. Yogi Berra or someone there, but I think it's safe to say like this decade is still going to have a tremendous amount of evolution and innovation ahead. It just, I mean, you already see, these big things that people are talking through about like, how is, like the next wave of mobile technology going to like change, the bandwidth of how we engage. This leads us to things around the metaverse. All the stuff about like blockchain and Web3, which, again, I'll just disclaim, I think we're still really, really early in that space. But I think there's some really interesting patterns there that as they start to mature are also going to like, create creative disruption, of, oh, well, how do we engage with people? And, what are their preferences and what are their channels? And then you just got all these software developers. I mean, the world is full of software developers with, things like AWS and Azure and Google Cloud and all these open source frameworks. I mean, it's a bonanza of things that are available for software, and that's not even like getting into no code, which is low code and no code helping expand the pool of people who can create things where they have ideas without having to be like an expert software engineer themselves. I mean, you just add all this together and you just realize that, yeah, this great app explosion, it just doesn't see like there's any short-term barriers that are going to slow it down. Um, but yeah, let's get to the next decade and see how the world changes from there.
So when it comes to data itself, then organizations cannot implement piecemeal strategies, right? So data readiness is a critical component of data mapping. So how can brands identify then which sources to integrate with the CDP, the customer data platform, when there are enormous amounts, as you're saying, of it available?
Yeah, again, this kind of goes back to, I think it's a variation of like the technology evaluation, which is, yeah, there's infinite data, and the only way you can, like, you just can't do all of it, partly because it's also changing too. It's a matter of prioritization, and again, I think if you go back to the capabilities and you look at use cases that you're trying to achieve with customers, and then you map backwards from there to like, okay, it's not just the technologies I need to execute that, but what's the data and where are the different sources, that are feeding into either the completeness or the accuracy of that data. And then one of the things you almost always find, right, this is the current stage of data ops, is yes, it turns out the data is here and it's available and it's in our warehouse, but the definitions are not quite perfectly aligned. And this field, combines things this way, and this one has a different set of definitions. And so, like, this process of, data readiness or, metadata management or, all that, like, that is like where there's all this innovation happening right now, both in the technology, but also just in the practice, because we've never had to really deal with this amount of like interconnected data before. So it's, as you look at either a big challenge or a big adventure.
So what room would you say does all this leave for intuition itself? And there's so much data available, which is empowering so many strategies. So what role will intuition have to play going forward?
Yeah, I've joked before that sometimes people say data driven means driving around to find the data I want that supports my predetermined hypothesis and conclusion. Because yeah, there is just so much data there that, if you go in with a predetermined outcome you're looking to support, it's just so easy to, I mean, even fool yourself into like somewhere finding some data that, basically correlates, with that plan. And so you just, I think it's very dangerous to go in with predetermined conclusions. I think the thing that, but at the same time, if you just like, don't have any like framework whatsoever, and you're simply going in and saying like, what is there in the data today? Yeah, I mean, the book Fooled by Randomness comes to mind. I mean, like, yeah, there's infinite patterns that you could, start to look at. I think the in between those two extremes is really, quite frankly, the scientific method. It's about having a hypothesis and being relatively rigorous and disciplined about saying, okay, we're going to test this hypothesis, but we're going to be careful not to go out of our way to, again, try and reach a predetermined conclusion. And as in science, I think it's the same thing, in marketing, which is the intuition and the creativity usually comes in at, first of all, what are the hypotheses? Because now you're starting to synthesize a lot of different things that today, the machines aren't quite good enough to, give us, broad-reaching hypotheses. And then the second place where you get creative is very often when you have a hypothesis, you have to get kind of creative about, like, okay, how are we going to test this? And particularly if we're looking at historical data and we're getting some sort of pattern that seems to support the hypothesis, very often you can't just conclude like, oh, yes, okay, perfect, done. What you need to do is say, like, okay, that's supporting this hypothesis. Can we actually run an experiment? Is there something we can try that will validate, and perhaps try and eliminate some of the other, confounding variables that, I mean, again, any test in marketing is infinite confounding variables, but, you're trying to, like, again, like the fewer additional variables that you can try and isolate out, the better. And that just takes enormous creativity to figure out, like, how do we do that?
Yeah, well, so speaking of like it being the best of times and worst of times, so even the customer journey is no longer linear, right? So in the digital age, customers go to different channels for more information. So how can CDPs help marketers deal with a multitude of touch points and turn customer data into actionable insights?
Yeah, I mean, again, I have mixed feelings on the CDP side of things like that. I'll just be very honest. I'm not sure that there's kind of three pieces, right? There's this underlying data layer for the company. And this is essentially now where, I mean, Snowflake and Databricks and, I mean, these massive ecosystems like this, are trying to universalize, how we manage data across the organization. There's the other end of the spectrum, which is very operational systems. And this is actually the things that are guiding the way, our salespeople, our marketing teams, like, do engagements, with the customers, whether they're one-off or, automated or digital. And so we think of, like, the data warehouses on the one end of that spectrum, and we think about things more like, frankly, CRM platforms, marketing automation platforms, things like that on the right. And the CDPs are kind of this weird thing in the middle where I'm not entirely, like, some of them actually look a lot like a CRM, or marketing automation platform, just under another name. And others, the closer they get to being very integrated data warehouse, like, I guess I'm just not entirely sure if that category, as a middle category between those two extremes, will continue to be strong on its own, or if it was almost a bridge into this future where, hey, we just need the total data ops infrastructure in our company to be much stronger. So anyways, all that is to say, like, I think, the whole point of that data ops infrastructure across the company is you need to make it accessible for any frontline apps or operations or any sort of digital capabilities like that to be able to both feed the new data that, from touch points they have into that centralized infrastructure, but even more importantly, arguably, right, be able to leverage that. So again, they're not ending up in these isolated silos, but they're part of a much broader, connected, like, data universe.
So how can one make it more accessible and leverage it best?
This is on both sides of the equation. You have to be looking to open products, integrated products. I'm obviously biased in this. This is what I do for a living, is champion this. But basically, when you buy a product now, very often one of the first class questions you need to be asking is not just what are its internal capabilities, like what's inherent to the capability that it's giving you, but also how does it actually integrate with the rest of my stack, and frankly not just my Martech stack anymore, but kind of my broader business tech stack, like because if it doesn't integrate, it's like what's that thing about the tree falls in the forest and is there anyone around to actually hear it?
Yeah, okay. So, but moving a small amount of data from one API to another isn't really that hard, but doing it at scale is. So, how would you advise SaaS companies then, with a growing number of integrations, to create a successful scaling integration strategy and partnership program?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on where you are in the broad tech ecosystem. Like there's if you squint, you kind of look at it as like, okay, there are platforms, that tend to have many products that integrate to them, and so they kind of almost become like a hub. And again, I think like the broadest example of that you could actually look at are things like the data warehouses. Like their whole existence, rides, on the assumption that yes, bring us your tired, your hungry, your poor data from wherever it comes from. We want it. There's that. But then there's, if you're in more of an app inside this environment where it's maybe less about all these other products that integrate to you, but it's making sure that you integrate with whatever it is, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but usually a relatively small number of like the most important ecosystems, to support your go-to-market, to support your customers. Like, okay, well, what are the core platforms our customers are using? Let's make sure we integrate really well with those. And I think, again, like from a, managing a whole bunch of integrations, gets challenging, which is, again, why I think if you're an app more than a platform, you need to be really strategic about like, okay, well, which are the ones that are really most valuable to us in what we're doing? And for the ones that are sort of on the long tail, you start to look to things like, these integration platform as a service tools, Automate or Zapier or Workato or Tray or things like that, just because they sort of allow that long tail. But you want your core native integrations to be really great and smooth you don't want your customers to have to rely on then some other third-party solution to be able to like get the full value out of your product inside the platform ecosystems that the customers are relying on.
So HubSpot's own approach in the app ecosystem that you guys have built has been like, it's really grown in the past couple of years. So what has HubSpot's strategy been here?
Yeah, I think it's just recognizing like a CRM is one of those kinds of, platform centerpieces into a stack. And it really relies on other apps being able, like to contribute data, other apps being able to pull data. So yeah, I mean, our view has been to be incredibly open. Like we made the strategic decision, like we're not trying to like directly monetize, our ecosystem. No offense to those companies who do, but like, from our perspective, the value is, when these apps that customers want to use integrate with the CRM, and there's just no barriers to that. And in fact, whether, I mean, it's not just that, it's also like competitive things. Like, HubSpot has in our app marketplace, like dozens and dozens, probably hundreds at this point, of different products that compete with different aspects of what HubSpot does. And we're cool with that too. That's like, come on in, the water's fine, because all this comes down to like ultimately letting customers have as easy as a time of possible of getting the stack that they want, the stack that they love, working together easily. And so like if, us as a platform and our partners who we work with who are building these apps, if we do that work to make those integrations good, everybody benefits.
There are actually platforms who were charging for having integrations on them, but I think a lot of them have now moved towards like the first year is free and then we'll see model. What do you think of that model?
I mean, again, different companies have different business models. I think HubSpot's strategy at this point is just really clear that the value of as open of an ecosystem that encourages as much innovation and experimentation and doesn't try and put barriers of like, well, we'll only let you do it if you fit this category, or yeah, you either have to pay us this, or well, we'll give you a year free to sort of draw you in, aha, and then like you owe us 30% of your income forever. I mean, it's just, yeah, again, different companies have different business models. If it works for them, it's great. I think for us, we just see so much value in the openness of that ecosystem, and then ultimately that translates to value for HubSpot by just making our CRM platform a preferred platform for customers.
And so, have you seen instances of apps that have just been developed to get on ecosystems, and they were like not, and that is their primary strategy?
I think there's a couple variations of there. So there's some apps that get built specifically for one particular platform. Like for instance, one of the apps in the HubSpot ecosystem is Org Chart Hub, which has come up with this absolutely brilliant way of sort of visualizing and managing like account sales and marketing strategies. And so they built that, and now a number of other products, specifically for HubSpot, which it's great. We love them, and because they're so focused on just HubSpot, they're really able to build things that just, it basically feels native, to the platform. And we've got other companies that look at HubSpot as kind of like a bootstrapping ecosystem. It's like it goes back to this thing, like again, there's so much competition out there in the SaaS world at large, that when you're just getting going as a startup, usually the most challenging part of the go-to-market is finding a focal point where you can say like, okay, here's a narrow enough audience that we have the ability to target, we have the ability to delight, and if we win those and we make that successful, then we take the next step of where do we expand, audiences, more broadly from there. And I think for a lot of startups, picking an ecosystem and really focusing on succeeding within that particular ecosystem can be a great way, because again, you just sort of narrow your targeting, you can be much more efficient with your spend, you can really understand who those customers are, you can make the product tweaks that make those customers delighted, and then again, once you've got that momentum and your growth, by all means move to the second ecosystem and the third ecosystem. Yeah, that sort of ecosystem as a bootstrapping, in product market fit. I've now seen that quite a few times too.
And so you've also pointed out before, like after more than a decade of exponential Martech growth, the industry is currently going through its first truly difficult economic environment. So, what advice do you have for early stage Martech companies looking to either restructure their business models or to find a willing acquisitor?
Yeah, it is going to be a challenging time. I think so from a business perspective, right? The most powerful thing you can do is either find a lever that is truly going to be able to keep your growth curve incredibly robust, because we're still in a state where, again, we were talking earlier, like there is investment capital, to invest in this sector, but investors are getting more discriminating on like, okay, who's really going to take the, deliver that sort of 10x impact, to the capital. And so if you're one of those companies where you've got a strategy and a mechanism for, achieving that curve, I say, yeah, full steam ahead. For a lot of companies, just, yeah, the nature of distributions is you just, they won't be that at this stage. And I think for them to then tack more in the direction of, quite frankly, profitability. SaaS has the ability to be an incredibly profitable, model. And so, yeah, I think adapting into that, and then being in a position where like, okay, if you've got a growth strategy for your customers and you're winning them and you're delighting them and you're doing it profitably, that might be sort of a slower growth curve, but it's also a more stable one. And if you just play this game of like, well, hey, business cycles, they are cycles, and we will make it through on the other side, of this contraction. and there will be another big wave of growth. And I think the folks who are able to come out of this contraction period and say, like, hey, we've got strong, solid businesses. We have customers who love what we do. Oh, all right, now things are accelerating again. Like, yeah, here, let's pour on the gas.
So we talked to Jay McBean as well, who was also at the ecosystem conference
Love
with you,
Jay.
and yes, and he said that tech has always pulled the rest of the industry out of every recession, and this is something that might happen again. What do you think of that?
I think I agree with that. I think, again, it's hard to find a dimension of the modern economy that isn't impacted by tech.
Mm.
I mean, I'm not sure what industry would. I mean, again, like you have, even if you say like, I don't know, like there's going to be like the green energy, like again, if we're going to say like, oh, well, that's going to be this next wave that pulls, okay, well, that's technology, In fact, actually, I know we're talking more, SaaS, but there's going to be whole ecosystems of like, how software like, manages that, infrastructure and capability, and how does that plug into, the way in which all sorts of businesses from like, manufacturing and, supply chains for, further downstream business. So I think I agree. I guess I'd be curious what the counter hypothesis, like what else would bring us out of that?
Fair. Okay, so the last question is a little personal, and keeping everything aside, then it is: what would you be doing in your life right now if not this?
That's hard to say. I would say, one of the things I really love about what I'm able to do today is this combination of like being able to study these things myself and just be in a constant mode of learning, but then try and find ways to like synthesize that and help share it and teach it and explain it to others. I take a lot of joy in that process. And so I guess that would mean I'd probably be a teacher or some sort of curmudgeon-y college professor or something like that.
Okay, all right. So meanwhile, in some alternate universe, that's what's happening. But we have you here today, so that's great. That was the last question. Thanks everyone for joining us for this month's episode of Outgrow's Marketer of the Month. That was Scott Brinker, who's the VP Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Check out their website for more details, and we'll see you once again next month with another Marketer of the Month.